Hi, everyone. Welcome to Marketing Your First Book. My name's Kathy Hanneback. I'm the founder and CEO of Ideas on Fire, the academic editing and indexing agency that helps interdisciplinary scholars turn brilliant ideas into publishable, often field-shaping books. And I'm very excited to welcome you to this final spring session in our first book publishing series. This is a six-part series that walks you through every stage of that first book journey, from proposal to publication and beyond. And you can view all of the past sessions from the past year on our website at ideasonfire.net. And in that series, I'm joined by acquisitions editors, editorial directors, production editors, and marketing directors, such as are here today, from more than a dozen leading university presses. And we are here to demystify that first book publishing process. At Ideas on Fire, we've helped hundreds of scholars refine their book proposals and book manuscripts, including many for first books, strengthen their arguments, and ultimately bring those books into the world. And I find that first books are a particular joy to support. They have a kind of different affective or emotional thing to them. And that's one of the reasons why I designed this series. So I'm very excited to be in conversation here today with Allison Means, who's the Associate Director and Marketing Director of the University of Iowa Press, as well as Cameron Ludwig, who is the Associate Director for Marketing and Sales at Duke University Press. And the three of us are here to demystify academic book marketing, what that actually involves, what your press is doing behind the scenes, and where your role as an author fits in. Now, I find that this is an area where there's often a lot of confusion, and we'll be talking about that. And there's also often a lot of pressure, which we'll also be talking about, particularly for first-time authors who are juggling a whole host of other responsibilities. So if you have questions for our speakers during the webinar, you can click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit those, and we'll have time at the end to get to those questions in Q&A. So I'd love to start our conversation here today by kind of grounding us in the basics, what marketing actually looks like across the life of an academic book. So to our speakers, can you walk us through what your marketing team does at your press for each book, from pre-publication through production and post-publication? Maybe Allison, can we start with you about what this looks like at the University of Iowa Press?
Sure. So at Iowa, I like to say that we think of marketing as a long arc versus a single moment. So that starts when, in pre-publication, when we think of this as the foundation being laid. So at this point, we are identifying the book's primary audiences, um, scholarly, classroom, professional in general, and we're shaping messaging accordingly. We are focusing on metadata like the book description, keywords, BISAC codes, author bios, all of which affect discoverability on, Google, Amazon, and library vendor platforms. And we are starting our planning, like our publicity angle, like meaning we're asking the questions, what conversations is this book entering? Where could it land? Be that journals, podcasts, review outlets, and conferences. And then during the production, we think of this as refining and activating. So that is when we are finalizing jacket copy and cover feedback. We are building our seasonal catalog list that your book will go into and seeing where it will fall on the list. We are creating advanced electronic galleys, and we're starting that outreach to anyone we have identified as needing a really early contact or a long lead time for whatever reason. This is also when we are really coordinating with you, the authors, on things like conference timing and other, pub date adjacent opportunities. And then post-publication, as the book is out in the world, our work is definitely not done. It just shifts. So we are still at this time reaching out to potential reviewers. That happens for academic books for a long time. We are focusing on award submissions and course adoptions, and we are keeping an eye out for special topical tie-ins or news hooks. We always love working on academic books because they do have a long tail. So their marketing really reflects that. Some of our most successful books, find their readership months or even years after publication, and that is very normal. So.
Yeah, great. I don't have a ton to add to what Allison said. We do pretty much the same thing. A couple of things I wanted to highlight, though. your book lives with us forever. So, like in the marketing team, when Allison talks about the long arc, like we're seeing your book in oftentimes I'm seeing books at contract level. I'm seeing them at the editorial board level, getting ready, planning, seeing what's coming down the pipeline. And then once your book is out, it lives with us. It doesn't go back to your editor. It doesn't go back to design. It stays with marketing and sales. So it is within our best interest to do everything we can, work all of the angles, work with you because yeah, we want you to have a good home with us and to backlist well. I also wanted to highlight the marketing questionnaire, which is probably the most important tool that you give to us to work with as a marketing team. At Duke, we're often looking at the marketing questionnaire when your book is transmitted. That is, it's going to the editorial design and production teams and starting to become an actual book. That's when we want you to complete this marketing questionnaire, really to think about who are my contacts, what have I already done to build a platform, what are the awards I want to do, what are the conferences I attend, who are the influencers in my field. And one of the main things I would love to see authors do more of is really refine their key selling points and their comparable titles. So I think a lot of times with academic books, I get a lot of marketing questionnaires that will highlight themes or topics in the book as key selling points, and that's not quite it. What we really want is why people need to pick up and read this book and why right now. And those unique themes are absolutely a part of that. But it is kind of a tweak to framing that I would love to see authors think more about. And we can talk about comping in a little bit as well, but it really behooves you too to sort of see what is happening in your field. What are other people doing? What are other publishers doing? And looking at your field most recently. So like only looking at the past 3 to 5 years, not looking, what was happening back in 1999, which is often another fun pitfall. So yeah, I think that's the main stuff is yeah, and I think Allison nailed it. It's getting the metadata together as well, which is probably the most important piece of publishing today. Um, and all of the things. And there's plenty of author toolkits on press websites you can browse to find more.
I think this is really helpful for folks to understand what's happening on the press side. And we're going to dive a little deeper into individual things that was just mentioned there. But I want to shift to kind of the author side of the equation for a minute. From your perspective, what are some of the specific contributions that authors can make to support their book's reach and ultimately to make the biggest difference in how a book gets seen and taken up?
Allison, you want to kickstart again?
Okay,
I'll
sure.
go. I can go. I can go.
Okay.
For me, it's networking. It's working your network. And I get it. Authors are shy. This is not me tooting my own horn, I promise you, because I get squirrely about it. I have published books and I get so squirrely about it. And it's so hard to self-promote and to tell people about it. I get it. It's so hard, but that is the single most important, best thing you can do is work your network. At conferences, in classes, it's the art of the hand sell. Talking to your local booksellers, your local librarians about your book. Just putting it in your email signature that you've got a book coming with a link to the book page. Super simple, but it spreads the word. Yeah, work your networks. Don't be shy.
That's exactly I agree completely. So if you want a fun little acronym, we think of it as context, connection, and clarity. So you are the expert in your field and you know your readers and your communities better than we ever could. So we really rely on you to help us identify these conferences and listservs we should be alerting, associations you're part of, or specific classrooms or interdisciplinary audiences for outreach. This just gives us like a sharper focus for what we know how to do, which is market. I'll also just add that responsiveness to connections that come about in a really timely manner is super helpful. So, if you hear from your marketing person timely feedback on, yes, I can do this interview, I'm going to do this Q&A. So just think of it as something, we want you to think of it as something you're going to prioritize and, understand that even though the review may not be maybe months out or the interview may not appear for a while, the best thing that you can do is let us know you're interested and so that we can help you make that connection and move it forward. Um, and then just to like re reaffirm what Cameron said about, just tweaking your thinking a little bit on, that clarity part of you helping us explain why your book matters now. I mean, it helps us enormously if you can come up with one or two sentences that anybody could understand and that we can just use into perpetuity. And even as those things change or new sentences come into your mind as something else happens, we want to hear those from you so that we can use them as well.
Nice. I find that one of the things that I see a lot in my work with authors is uncertainty about expectations or uncertainty about who's supposed to be doing what. What is the press doing versus what should they be doing as authors? Kind of whose work is what, right? And I'm curious, in your experience, either in your current roles or in previous presses and companies you've worked with, what are some of the kind of common misconceptions that first time authors in particular often have about book marketing? I'm hoping we can kind of bust some of these assumptions and get people on the right path so that they can better market their book.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm going to jump in because we were chatting about this before the webinar opened. It's the lack of control. While there's so much that you can do, there's no guarantee. It is a hustle and it's a constant hustle, and sometimes it means absolutely nothing. I worked as a publicist before I was here at Duke, and I would get books that would have just oodles and oodles of publicity, tons of events, tours, bookstores, like booksellers loved it, and then the sales were not there. And then I have books that have gone out super quietly. Maybe it's a professor emeritus. They're not really like doing much networking or whatever, and then they've exploded. So I would love to say that there are sure things in terms of expectations. But there really is a lack of control that I think can be difficult to parse when you're starting to work together. Now, that said, you should rely on communication, and that is something that you should ask for. So, in terms of being confused or wanting to know what's going to happen or who's going on, I've never been at a marketing department or heard of a marketer at a university press that's not wanted to have that phone call with an author. Whether it's a Zoom, whether it's an email, we want to talk to you early and we want to lay down, this is what you can expect from us, and here's how we would like you to amplify that. So if it's publicity, okay, here's what we're thinking in terms of sending your book to journals, but you happen to have a personal contact to the editor of whatever, we would love for you to work that contact if that's something that you feel comfortable doing. If you want to go on a big book tour, but I've got 150 books a year that I've got to handle, being able to sit down and say, okay, that's wonderful, we love that, and we can support you with getting in touch with the store to sell. But if you're going to organize it, you'll need to organize that. It is a constant level of communication, and I think that's the main thing that you should expect and ask for.
Mhm. I completely agree with that. And, I'll just say the one big misconception I think is that marketing equals, mass media coverage and social media, going viral. And in reality, at the university press level, our marketing is really targeted and strategic. Those are the two key things that we're looking for. So we're really looking to support your work behind the scenes. And again, that goes back to really strong metadata, making sure your book is discoverable, course adoption outreach. This is not necessarily about chasing headlines. If there's an opportunity, we'll do that, but that's just not always the case. And, you know, I think another thing, again, probably a bit repetitive of what we've said, but the press or whatever press you're working with, we can't just handle everything after publication. We do a lot, but what we can't replace is the authenticity of your voice and your connections with your networks. So really what we are doing, we're the amplifier there. And we just want you to remember always that you should not underestimate yourself and how influential you can be in your field and the questions that you can answer, that we can't.
That's such a good way to put that, Allison. Like, I want to tattoo that somewhere. That was a really great way of putting that.
I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, I think scholars are often we're not trained. Um, Nothing about PhD training kind of encourages us to think of ourselves as someone who has to kind of market an idea, right? Like we went into academics, we wanted to have a different kind of career. But I think a better way, and I think both of your comments have illustrated this, a different way to think about marketing is just sharing your research, right? Which all of us went into academia to do the research and to share it with the communities that we care about. And you're both making a really important point, I think, that the communities that you care about, you know them better than any publisher ever could, right? And so it's really just a matter of identifying who those committees are that you want to speak to, that you care about, that you want to give this book to because you think it's important to them, and figuring out how to do that in the best way possible, and collaborating with your marketing director at your press, collaborating with the marketing staff at your press to best do that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I wonder if we can, before we get to some of the other kind of relationships between authors and presses, both of you have mentioned metadata quite a lot. And I guarantee there are folks in this audience who don't know what that means and what it has to do, particularly what it has to do with book marketing. So, from a book marketing perspective, what is a book's metadata? What are BISAC codes? And what does that have to do with sales?
Well, this is super fun. This is where we get really, really nerdy, y'all. Here comes
Yep.
the tech talk. So metadata starts everything from your ISBN. So it's everything about your book, and it flows from the ISBN for your book, really. It is what goes through the internet pipes to make sure your book is on every platform that we want it to be on. These platforms include some of our sort of community sales tools. We have some tools that we use sort of behind the scenes that are online. Your Amazon page, your page at the press, your Barnes& and Noble page, bookshop.org. And the most important thing about metadata is we always want to lock it down early. So things like changing a title, changing a price, if your metadata is already out in the world, those are all big no-nos, because there's no guarantee that the internet pipes are still running smoothly at that point. It's a whole lot of little bits of data that are going out in the world. Now, indexers and web crawlers are the most important part of that. So when your press is asking you to do things like keywords and abstracts, both at a book level and at a chapter level, that's what we're gearing that towards. It's so that libraries can add all of those to their search terms for other researchers. It's so that a web crawler knows that this book is about Canada in 1980, and it can find that, hey, there's a chapter in this book that does it. Most metadata is also ranked as a hierarchy. And so when we're also talking about things like changing your title or your subtitle from your proposal, that's a lot of what we're thinking about is if the book is about Canada, maybe we want to have the word Canada in the title. If it's about computers, maybe we want to have something tech focused. There really does need to be a little bit of a blunt instrument when you think about packaging a book in that way. So it might feel a little lowest common denominator, but we live in a world where you get a half second to see something on a screen before somebody scrolls past. So making sure that all of those bits and pieces are as legible as possible and as correct as possible out in the world so that it doesn't impede somebody clicking and ordering. At Duke, we aim to have that all of that info out about 6 months before your book's publication. On our website specifically, I believe it's 5 months, and I'm going to forget the date. It's an actual number of days when your book opens up for pre-order on our website. But that's not to say it's not available for pre-order on Amazon or whatever else. And that's when you can start your marketing too, sharing links, looping in pre-orders, getting stuff, updating your website, etc.
Mhm. So I'll just, everything Cameron said, yes, exactly right. We also, this is a time where when you're thinking about metadata, think about what books your book is in conversation with and how did you get to that book, be it on Amazon or through a discussion with a friend? What words were you using when you were talking about it? And how can you best incorporate that into your book's metadata? And also, again, prioritizing. So where you get dinged is if your book, let's say that there's a chapter about, carefully analyzing Harry Potter, but your book isn't Harry Potter. So, where does the metadata go? And how can we get it so that people know that if they're interested in scholarship about this topic, but it is not a book about this, how do we frame that? So you can have a conversation with your marketing person about that or say like I'm confused about this and we'll talk about it and get it to the best place. But Cameron's absolutely right. This is so important. And for each press it depends. So Duke's timing is not the same as Iowa's because we are much smaller. So we do things, in a seasonal hunk basically. So we're looking at all of our right now I'm very much focusing on all of our fall 2026 books metadata and going through every single book and making sure, okay, like here's what we think. Yes, everyone agrees on this, all of those types of things. So we ask for these suggestions. We don't necessarily reach back. I think another thing though is we don't necessarily reach back out. So if you are wondering as the author, we want you to come forward, ask us the questions, want to have the discussions. We love that you trust us, and we are good at our jobs, and we are constantly thinking about these problems and solutions to them, and how we can best make things happen for your book. But with that comes, just truly like getting all of our ducks in a row, and we'll contact you if needed, but it's not always on the top of our list. So do feel free to reach out and put yourself there so we can have those
Yeah.
conversations.
Let me actually want to build on that just a little bit if I can. When Allison too talks about think really specifically and broadly about what your book is doing, and I want to talk a little more about abstracts and keywords, especially at the chapter level. I think, and what I'm seeing is that ebooks are becoming more and more a primary format. And I know that's terrifying. Like I started in 2009, like right when Kindle was starting to take off, and we all thought the industry was going to totally implode. It didn't. It's all good. And I do still think that print books will matter. It'll be interesting to see how that evolves and adapts the way that trade houses have. But certainly for academic publishing, libraries and their ebook collections have played a huge role and are playing a bigger role. And I think we're seeing students and we're seeing faculty getting more and more comfortable with using electronic editions and having their students use them. So when we're asking you for things like abstracts and keywords, all of that goes into how we produce an ebook. There's services that do all of this packaging, they call it. I wish I could get that technical with it. I cannot. But all of that info flows into the ebook and it makes your book more discoverable and more useful for both the librarians to acquire it and then for end users to access it.
And I'll just say one more thing too. So with the long arc, the other thing that we're striving to do is keeping your metadata fresh. So even though your book has been out for a year, if something else has happened to make it relevant, send a quick email and we'll
Yep.
see like, okay, what can we put in the metadata? How can we tie this out? So it goes not just as possibly like a pitch to somebody, but it goes in that back matter too, that the unseen things that really are going to push your book out visibility wise on any given search.
Yeah, and Kit, I want to call out in the chat really quick in terms of multiple versions showing up. That's why we want it locked in early and we don't want it to change because that's what happens. And once it's out there, it is incredibly difficult to fix and it is incredibly difficult to erase. And I wish I had a better answer for how we could do that. And my only hope is that one day we will. But yeah, at the moment, it's really, really difficult. So once that stuff is out there and it gets locked in, we want it to stay locked.
Mhm.
Nice. I mean, I think part of what this is illustrating is that marketing has both kind of technical elements to it and maybe more, for lack of a better word, like more holistic or subjective elements, right? And I think authors are probably more familiar with the more subjective side of things in terms of talking to their community, trying to think about what courses my book be taught in, or what conferences do I regularly go to where I could talk about my book or where my publisher might want to exhibit. But the technical side of thing, because it's on the production side, I feel it's like completely opaque to authors. And I hope this is helpful as an introduction to metadata and its importance in book sales and marketing. But we could do an entire webinar just on that.
Gosh,
And there
yes.
are many, many webinars, and I'm sure both of you do these a lot. But it is interesting that just like these two different sides of it, right?
Yeah, gosh. And what's so funny is it is both so old school and so new school. Like ISBNs have been around for so
Yeah.
long. Like talk about like a fun, nerdy Wikipedia hole to go down. Like do it. Click into it. Like the history of the ISBN is wild. Yeah, it can be really wild. And it is something I would have never learned until I became a publisher, started going to these conferences, started learning, and then now it's changing so much. Like we get invited to webinars by the Book Industry Study Group, BISG. They manage BISACs. That's updated every year. So like we are constantly sort of a continuing education thing that we have to stay on top of.
Yeah. So to go back to something that I think both of you have mentioned in different ways, is this topic of self-promotion. And I get this question or maybe complaint quite a lot from authors that I work with. I know both of you do. I think anyone in publishing experiences this, is that so many scholarly authors in particular are not particularly interested in self-promotion or are at least wary of it, right? If not actively resistant to it. And I get that. It can feel weird. It can feel super awkward. It feels like you're a used car salesman, just like hawking your book to anyone who you happen to have a conversation with. And that feels icky. No one likes that. But I think part of what this webinar and what I think all three of ours work is about is saying that that's not what book marketing actually is. So I'm curious from your perspective and in your experience, what are some easy, authentic, non-skeezy ways that authors can promote their book's visibility without feeling like they're constantly trying to hawk something?
Oh, that's exciting. Allison, you want to start this one?
Sure. So I will say yes, this comes up all the time. And Kathy, I love that you said used car salesman because I so once a month I talk to students or once a semester I talk to students about like how I got into publishing and how I had the assumption, like I think truly 90% of people that go into publishing that I wanted to be an editor because that is the job you've heard of. That's
Yep.
the job you see on TV,
Yep.
all the things. And I went to a quick grad school program at the Denver Publishing Institute, and the first 2 weeks were all focused on editing. And I remember calling my mom and being like, I hate it. I don't, what am I going to do? And because I had the assumption that being in marketing would be like being a used car salesman, that's all I could think of. And then as soon as we got into it, I was like, oh, so I just get to talk to people all day about books that I like. Okay, that's not the same thing. And I love doing that. So, it's something that is the perfect analogy and to think of it as your for yourself, just like I did. I'm happy to do that for a lot of books, but think of it in terms of your own book. So we tell our authors that yes, you don't want to feel like you're hawking your book, but what you are putting out in the world is yourself and your book as a resource that people want information from and want to know more about. So there are going to be opportunities where you're just sharing how your book connects and you don't have to end that with like and buy my book. You're putting your name out there, whether that's in the form of an op-ed that explores something and that you have all it is your byline that mentions the book, or again when you're at the conference and you're in relevant circles, people want to know that resources are available. That's why you're there. So it shouldn't feel icky. It should just feel like, you're not pressuring anyone to buy this book, but just so you know, it exists. If you want to know more, we can have a conversation. But that's again where that immediate yes and being open to have the conversations, whether that's on a podcast, at a panel, in a roundtable, you want to say yes. So it's just, keeping your relevance out there and doing the things that you are naturally inclined to do anyway. That's how it stays authentic because you want people to know this information. That's why you've written the book. So just, we ask authors to just frame their mindset that way instead of I'm trying to sell my book.
Yes, 100%. And I think too, a couple things, reminding yourself that everybody else is doing this too. Like, when's the last time you judged a colleague because they were talking about their new book project? They're not judging you. Like, I promise. Everybody is, it's like going to an exercise class. Like, everybody's worried about themselves. I promise they're not watching you or judging you. But those are the organic conversations. And right, like, especially I think of conferences as kind of being the main nexus really for a lot of these academic titles. That's what the conversation is. And like your book is meant to be an intervention in those spaces. So of course you should talk about it and be open about it. I think for me also it's just do the little things. Like start with the little things. You don't have to go full bore and like don't start a social media if you're not already doing it. Like don't try to start a podcast. We can talk about that trend later because that's a crazy trend. But do the little things. Put the book and the link in your email signature. Make sure your faculty page is updated. Make sure you're working with your department or your university's communications office to send a notice that your book is out. Take advantage of any of those small opportunities. Like there's so many departments that have like a faculty bookshelf or do like a poster in the hallway. Like take advantage of those things. Because you never know who's going to see what, where, when, and then come and send you an email, come up to you at a conference, pick up your book when they see the cover on the publisher's table. All of those little things kind of are geared toward what's the Mad Men classic. Like you have to see something 6 times before you actually pick it up or buy it or click it. All of that snowballs. And it's start with the little things and just talk about it. Talk about your work organically with your colleagues.
Yeah. And one more thing too. So as you're doing those little things, think SEO. So every time that you can get your book linked or yourself linked to another page that's legit and talking about the topic you want to be involved in or another book that you want your book to be in conversation, your SEO goes up. So, you will be more likely to be found in a search if you are. So, anytime you can get those connections out there, link back to your book, link back to your publisher, all of those things do
Yes.
help and they accrue over time.
Can I talk about one really depressing thing really quick? Sorry.
Sure.
Let me break it down for a hot second. Um, when Allison said link back to your publisher, that is still always and forever going to be your publisher's preferred link if you share a link. Um, if Amazon matters to you, Amazon has recently rejiggered their algorithm, and they are now preferencing external links that point to an Amazon page. Now, I don't think anybody needs to be chasing the algorithm, the Amazon algorithm, but in terms of like a weird, depressing state of book publishing, that is very much what the Amazon machine is trying to get you to do. They don't want you to share bookshop.org. They don't want you to share, IndieBound or your publisher's website. They want you to share Amazon websites. So it's kind of an unfortunate truth, but I don't know. I just wanted to mention that because that's one of these crazy things that I'm like keeping an eye on. And that algorithm changes way more than it ought to.
And that's something to like think about as an author where you don't have to be an expert in SEO. You don't have to be an expert on whatever Amazon decides it wants to think and do today, right? I mean, that's part of the pleasure and the privilege of working with a marketing team at a press, right? Where their staff's job is literally to keep track of this stuff and keep track of the ever-changing algorithm and try to figure out what on earth we can do to increase books reach in relationship to that. But I think what you're both pointing out is that there are really easy, concrete, kind of low effort things that authors can do that link up to those other more technical practices or more complex practices or just more confusing practices that a press's marketing team is already on top of. So communicating with your marketing team at your press about here's what I'm doing, what are you doing, how can I best support you in this process is kind of how you get you get the whole publisher kind of behind your book. So let's kind of zoom out a little bit and talk about timing, because I often hear from authors that, oh, well, I'll start marketing my book when it comes out. And of course, that's not when marketing starts. It starts long before you even find a publisher. So, from your perspectives, when do you think authors should start to think about marketing their book, even if the book doesn't exist in book format yet? And how does that change for the author as the book moves toward and then beyond publication?
I mean, for me, it's at proposal stage. Like, as soon as you have an inkling that you are going to turn this into a book, you should be thinking about what's the frame. I talked about key selling points earlier, selling points. That's the moment you want to think about that. And that's also what makes a great book proposal is thinking through these key selling points. Why this book? Why this topic? Why now? And what am I doing that's unique? And that's a really easy thing to start from. Um, what we don't want you to do too much of, and let me say this, is think too granularly about things like cover art, like title. We want you to make the best book possible. Like that still for me is, along with author involvement, the silver bullet in a successful book or what we would consider a successful book. The book's got to be good. So when you're thinking about and you're writing through how sometimes it can be helpful to work a little backwards. Like I want my book to do these three things as selling points. And having that frame in mind as you're walking through it and making sure you're being really clear about these sort of selling points in your thesis and how this is going to speak to your field, I think can be really, really good things. In terms of specifics, I mean, I think platform is one of those like kind of always things. And I think too, as an academic, and I do not come from academia, this is the closest I get is academic publishing. Even just in terms of the job market, like working on a platform and having, your author website, whatever, keeping all of that stuff up to date and clean is all part of that. And that happens pre-publication, pre-book. And then for us, really, it's at that marketing questionnaire level is when we start wanting you to think about the nitty-gritty of it. And that's when we'll start asking you to get more specific.
That is a great answer, and I don't have a ton to add to that. I mean, we want the same things, and we want you to, I think the only thing I would add is we want you to be able to, cogently and quickly say that to us. That, again, the layperson, the person who doesn't come from academia, we want you to be able to answer those questions for us. Why do I care about this book? What conversations are being had about this? Who's in them? and how does my book fit into that particular marketplace. So we are really looking for that information at the marketing stage, but that again, like as Cameron very succinctly said, that starts at when you're writing the book and you're proposing it. um, and we feel the same way. I think most publishers that I've been in conversation with have the same thought of, the nitty gritty comes later. We will, the book cover, all of those things. And that is where we do want you to trust us as your publisher. And, you should be only signing a contract with a publisher that you feel is also going to support your work the way that you want it to be supported. And, think about what is your idea of success? How do you see success for your book? That can be a very actually different answer for
Yes.
different authors, and it is. And that will help us come up with a plan that works towards your goal of success as well as our goal of success. So it's just something that you should have in mind from the get-go and be asking yourselves these kinds of questions so that if you run into a speed bump or something where you and your publisher are not aligned, you can have that conversation and say like, here are my expectations. Does that align with what your press does? And you should just start by noticing things. Whatever publishers you're looking at, where are you seeing their books now? What do their covers look like? How are they placing things? And if you can easily answer those questions without reaching out, you probably, that's one avenue. But also it is okay to just ask other authors who published with that press, what was your experience with them? I'm looking for this. Do you think you'll get that, or did you want that when you published? And that way, again, you're setting yourself up for a positive experience from A to Z.
And can I want to say too something a little bit about expectations. I think often, and this is not a knock against editors, and this has been a lot of publishers I've talked to and publishers I've worked at. The expectations game can get a little skewed between acquisitions and books marketing. And I think part of that is editors showing excitement about things. And sometimes they can oversell the experience a bit. That's a really crude way of putting it. And I think a lot of authors get their hopes up about becoming a bestseller, even as an academic book, or all of these things are going to happen. And that's not necessarily the case. And I think that disconnect is where we see authors that get disappointed. And again, I don't want this to be a call out, and it is not any one specific editor or publisher, but I think it's a pretty common experience that folks come in with a proposal and a manuscript, and they think all of these big things are going to happen, and they're the lead title in the catalog, and going to get all of the effort. But for at Duke, we're doing 150 books a year, and that just can't be the case for all of them. And it can be hard, I think, for editors to be really realistic, or early in the process before we talk to you, to be really realistic about what those expectations are and what success looks like. Because it's very different. It's different book to book, author to author, year to year, changes constantly.
I would also encourage folks to be really upfront with the acquisitions editors that they talk to early on about what are you imagining as the success for your book? Not about numbers and sales and that kind of stuff, but if there is a specific community that you want to read this book, that should be part of your conversation right up front, because especially if it's not inherently obvious. Right. So let's say you are, a tenure track academic. This is your tenure book. Say you're in an anthropology department and you're writing a book that's obviously somehow engaging anthropology. And so presumably scholars in anthropology, there we go, are going to be a primary audience. But if you also wanted to speak to medical practitioners or artists or activists or community organizers, whatever your topic might be, that should be part of the conversation, and certainly part of your book proposal right up front, because that's going to dramatically shape not only how you frame the book as a writer, but also how your acquisitions editor is going to frame the book when they are pitching it to their bosses, to the editorial boards. And it's going to shape how the marketing staff is going to market that book, right? Because those are very different audiences: scholars in anthropology versus community activists or medical practitioners or whomever. And so that when you're thinking about audiences, don't hold it back. Don't wait till the marketing stage and be like, why did no doctor buy my book? And it's like, we had no idea that you cared about that. We would have framed this completely differently. So just communicate that right up front.
Absolutely. Yeah. And It's so interesting to talk about that too, because I think at every level somebody is speaking to a different audience. So like you're telling the editor about your book and you're framing it one way. The editor is telling the editorial board about your book and they're framing it a different way because that's a totally different audience. And then we're launching the book and they're talking to the marketing team and now we're framing it yet another way. And then we're working with you and with all of this extra info and then trying to frame it for the public or for other academics and or for other academics. So yeah, like be upfront with that. Like more material is great. I will always and forever take what an author is writing, what they think their book is about. What is in your intro? What is in your conclusion? What have you said is the most important thing in this book? Because it goes through a lot of iterations.
Mhm.
Nice. So I'm curious about how authors can best work with your marketing teams. So we've talked about things that an author could do themselves. We talked about what the marketing team itself is doing, kind of behind the scenes and in public. But let's talk about how to make that relationship more productive. So from your perspective, what can an author do to be a great collaborator for your marketing team? Are there things that they can do either early in the process or late in the process that support your work better and make it more effective?
It's an interesting question. Allison, if you have an easy answer, please feel free.
Right. Well, I'm not sure easy answer, but for us, we feel like the best collaborators are, they're engaged, they're realistic, and they're communicative. So, we love to work with someone who really will trust our expertise. And again, there's a reason you signed the contract with us. But we also don't want you to be passive. We want to hear from you. We want your opinion on top of all the things that we know. That's what makes, those are all the ingredients for the cake of marketing. So we want someone who can authors who share ideas but also who understand that we have constraints and things that we can't do. So not every idea can be executed, or if we aren't able to execute it well, our mantra is, to be transparent about that and say, like, here's what we can do for your book. Here's why you published with us. We have a great tie into this market. And we have, reviewers, authors, et cetera, who are looking for books. Your book will be found here because we can do this for you. And then you can add your, special magic of knowledge to that mix. So it's really just being open to that collaboration and having that trust on both ends that makes things really, a pleasant experience for everyone.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Communication is always and forever going to be number one. And I think I was trying to think a little more specifically too, in terms of communication. Where stuff gets lost for me are giant email chains.
Same.
Um, so, I was thinking it through a couple of things and sometimes that's organic and it happens, but it's always nice to kind of revisit like, what did we actually want to get to when we started this whole chain and we started going back and forth about, event bookings and review copies and whatever. So sometimes being able to like sit down and just say like, okay, summary, like this is the next action point. This is what I would like to do. This is what I would like for you all to do. The other thing is I think don't be afraid of a phone call. Um, I used to work in restaurants, and I remember training a new hostess once, and she was so afraid to even just do a pretend phone call for a to-go order. And I just feel like now people are so scared to pick up the phone, and I'm guilty of it too, right? I just don't think anymore of a phone call as being the quickest way to get an answer, but oftentimes it is. I like thinking out loud, like that's a big generative thing for me. And so sometimes an email chain is not necessarily going to get us to the most successful conclusion. Collusion. It is collusion. I think other things that have not always worked well, at least for me specifically, is trying to put things in like a shared drive or a shared document. Like if I have to go check multiple places and they're not my places, it's difficult to manage that. I think those can be great reference points, but something like that should always be sort of an author ownership. And then maybe we're having a call about it and you want to link me to your contacts that you've put together for people who might potentially adopt the book, so that I can have that resource there. But yeah, trying to do like collaborative Google Docs and things too have not always worked.
yeah. I had the exact same experience, and we actually have lots of authors who work with publicists as well. And
Yeah.
so we'll have that conversation and early on, and I'll say, I love the Google Shared Drive. Please do not ask me to just periodically check it for things you want me to do. That is never going to work.
I
And
won't do it.
No. And because we have very specific processes we need to follow to make sure that your book is getting this, all the things that it can out of working with us. And those have to come first. So then it's all these extras, these conversations that are great cherries on top, but they can't be our focus all the time. And we're working with many books at any given time. As Cameron said, like I always say the same thing, like your book is the book that you'll never be rid of me. As long as I like, so you can, kind of cut off ties with all the other people that press except for me. So, but, the flip side of that is that I'm still hearing from authors that whose books are 10, 15 years old with questions that are important and then I need to answer and address on top of what's going on with the frontlist books.
Nice. So this has been, I hope, incredibly helpful to folks who are here. I'd love in the last 15 minutes to get to some of the questions that were posted in the Q&A. If anyone listening still has questions, you can hit that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can still submit stuff. So one person asks, what are some of the most creative ways that you've seen people market their books?
I've been looking at this and I've been trying to think about it because I know I've got some goodies back in there, back in the brain, and I'm trying to rack my brain. I mean, I think of swag a lot. Like, I mean, I think sometimes swag can be really fun. We had some authors who did a book on the K-pop band BTS. And talk about starting early. Like they were at the Asian Studies Conference a year before their book even came out with stickers and postcards and like a fun little slogan with the BTS Army involved, which was really great and really fun and cute. And I think it made people sort of think about the book again when it came back around. I think about that. I've had some really cool events that authors have done. And I think the thing about events is it's always good to hitch yourself to something else. So if there's a humanities center on your campus, offer up an event for that. If there's a really interesting interlocutor that you want to have a Q&A with, that is a way better sell than just, I'm going to stand up here at this dais and talk about my book. If it's a conversation, if it's an interesting conversation partner, if it's with an interesting group, all of those things I think are big difference makers.
I completely agree. And we've had similar experiences. We did a book about the supernatural fans of the TV show Supernatural. And, we went to just like the fan cons for that show, and the authors were all about it, but they knew the stars of the show and like had fun pictures of them with the, holding the book, holding the galleys, things like that. So there's all these I would say just don't be afraid to put yourself out there because that's not something you might necessarily think someone would be responsive to, but in our experience, they kind of are. I mean, who doesn't want a book written about them or have their expertise touched on? So those types of maybe either really obvious or less obvious but fun tie-ins, those are the marketing campaigns that are just like have those mini fingers that can kind of go out to the broader audiences and show the relevance of your book in a way that people aren't instinctually thinking about.
Yeah.
Nice. So one of the other questions in the Q&A is, do you have any specific advice for authors who are independent scholars versus those who are affiliated with a
Ah,
university or institution?
the big old P word platform. That's for me. The more that you can shore up this idea of your expertise and your public expertise, the better. So even though you're an independent scholar, doing op-eds, pitching things, pitching reviews of other books even to publications. That's something I'd written down to address is you kind of get what you give in the book market. And it's fun to hear fiction writers talk about this too. Like more writers will be willing, I think, to review your book if you've reviewed their stuff. Like there is very much a reciprocity and a reciprocal market. And I think that's a little bit of a part of it too. And for public scholars, I think that can make a big difference. Like if you're working 2 years ahead and you're, like, hey, can I write up this short thing for you? Or hey, can I review this book for, external, whatever. That gives you name recognition, so you're not just coming out of the blue with a book project and saying, hey, here, I have this thing and you should care about it. You've already sort of been in there and you've been working with their community and with their folks to make your name recognizable.
Yes. And so we call like in our, little one sheet, we call it being a good literary citizen. So, but it's exactly that. It's, again, like you are you are putting yourself out there and you're offering to do something versus asking for something. So building those networks early and again authentically with something you want to do anyway, or you would enjoy doing, a book you would enjoy writing about, um, or reviewing in whatever publication. Those things do absolutely come back around.
Nice. Somebody asks about titling. Are you involved, or maybe when are you involved with conversations about book titles and subtitles?
Oh, this is gonna be, is this gonna get the flamethrower out, Allison?
Yeah, maybe.
Yes. Okay. So this is a fun and can sometimes be really contentious. And sometimes it can be contentious between marketing and editorial, between
Mhm.
marketing and authors, between editorial and marketing and authors. Like it can all get really intense. And I come from marketing, so of course I'm going to say this. To me, marketing owns the exterior of the book while editorial owns the interior of the book. And I touched on this earlier that sometimes we want to be a blunt instrument a little bit with a title. Like, Duke loves a two-word phrase and a subtitle, and sometimes they can be pretty opaque. I want it to be patently obvious, even to people in your field, this book is talking about this topic. I want those keywords. I want them in there and I want them up top. We talked about kind of a hierarchy of metadata. When they're doing web crawls, your title has more weight in the algorithm than your subtitle does. So the better weight and keywords you can give to these things, the more likely your book will get discovered in search. If you don't have any of those keywords in there, if BTS is not part of the subtitle for the BTS book, it's going to be a problem. So yes, we are very involved. I try to be very involved, and for us, that's when we're looking at launching a book into a season, and it's around the stage we're trying to lock in the metadata.
Same, it's the exact same in Iowa. And we are, we have those same, I I hate titles with too clever by half is what I called it, where I'm like, it's super clever, but I had to read the book to know how clever you were. I need to know, like I
Yep.
just need to get to the book. That's all I need.
Yep.
So, and I always advise authors don't do like a slash or like a parentheses in your title because all that does
Yes.
is make it not discoverable.
It screws up the internet pipes.
Yes. And
It does.
it's
Absolutely.
just a mess. And
Absolutely.
yes. So
Don't do
don't
it.
don't do it.
Let me add two more. The unknown quote. People
Yes.
love a partial quote, and it's not, I have a dream. It's something that's
Yep.
so marginal and out there and from the middle of a sentence that, like, who knows? And then coining words. Unless it's like a really, really obvious, like we did a book on bees when I was at Kentucky, and it was bee economy, BEE economy. Great, fine. Like we can work with that. But if you're like just coming up with sort of a new term that nobody in your field has ever done or worked with before, not a great title because people don't know what they're looking at. And I get it. It's the main point of your book and you're doing this thing, but it is really difficult as a title to say, let me sell you on this thing that's never been, that nobody's ever heard of before, even though this is the field that they're speaking to.
Yes.
Nice.
We got tropes.
Yeah.
Somebody else asks, do you have any advice for reaching out to colleagues or departments to see if they're interested in inviting you for a book talk?
I have had some authors who have done this really, really successfully. And I think about it too, like course adoption a lot. And I'm sure you've all received these emails. Like you might really like such and such to teach with or to consider for your upcoming semester. It's work, it's labor, to find these professors who are teaching in, areas and seminars that you might be well qualified to speak to. Absolutely, there's legwork there, but I think of it, it's like that kind of thing. Like, hey, I know you're teaching X, Y, and Z. I've got this new book out and I've got a really great talk that students might find helpful because, like, give
Mhm.
them the so what always. And I think also keeping it short. That's kind of the biggest thing that you really had to learn as a publicist was you need it right up front, up top.
Yep.
One of the Duke authors that did this really successfully is an author named Mimi Kook, Khuc. Her book, Dear Elia, she did a big tour for and did a ton of campus talks. And it is, and sometimes it can be even including a link to a YouTube video of something you've done previously. But I think being really clear about this is what it is, this is why I'm asking, and this is why it would be great for your students to talk about it.
Well, and again, this goes back to what we were saying about yes, the pitch itself needs to be short, and then you give them the links to your platform or to your, additional like Q&As, things that they supplementary can read if they want to, but you've already just given them just the nuts and bolts right there. So, the authors that we work with that have the most success with this already know the series, reading series they're wanting to pitch. And like they know why. And if they're unsure, we help them refine that pitch. And they know that, when to send it out, all of these types of things. So we work with them on the time, just really the timing and like, okay, maybe this is a little long. Why don't you add this as a link? Those types of things. But they do usually have like, here are the series I have in mind at these campuses, and here's when I think I can do this. And okay, then it's just go.
Yeah.
Nice. So, last question before we have to wrap things up. How do things like blurbs, awards, and advanced sales actually make an impact on marketing?
I'm getting all my flamethrowers out. Um, Couple different ways to think of it. I do think for academic books, blurbs can make a difference. Do they make the most difference? Not really, in my opinion. Um, I think people know pretty well up top if they're going to be interested in a book based on the title, based on the cover. You've already picked it up from a conference table, let's say. That's what's gotten you to pick that book up. Now, I do think for academic books, if you have good blurbs, can help sell somebody. But most of the scholars I've talked to, they want to see the table of contents. They want to read the introduction. So it's not something that I stress about. Although traditionally, I think folks have really stressed about it. And I think in the same way, it's become more and more difficult for scholars to volunteer as readers for future projects and for presses to find readers for future projects. Same with blurbs. Is it Simon and Schuster totally canceled having their authors ask for blurbs about a year and a half
I think
ago?
so. Yeah, yeah, I remember that.
And it does read a little false sometimes. Like we're talking about tropes. Like I'm sure you can all write an academic book blurb in your sleep for anything, nothing. Um, so I don't know that those matter as much. Awards I think can make more of a difference. I know for us, we're always trying to find the balance between awards that might actually be achievable and the cost of those awards. And then also, oh my God, why do 70 authors want to apply for the National Book Award? God bless you. It's not going to happen. Um, it very much might, but a lot of these do not nominate award university presses. It's really, really rare. It tends to be in poetry and fiction, which Iowa has an incredible list for. Um, but yeah, I think awards and especially the really specific association awards can be a good thing.
Yes, same answer, actually. We've had the same discussion always about, okay, do we need two blurbs for this book? Can we just do one? What is the most important? But then, again, to beat the dead horse, we're going back to like, well, what does the metadata say? Like, what do like we need to make sure that these things, and that to me is very secondary. And we have the same thing. Awards, while, we would love to submit to all the awards, it's actually a lot of work to do award submissions. It
Yes.
takes a ton of administrative bandwidth. And depending on what press you're with, they may just not have the ability to do so. So, what we like to do is have that again, we want that conversation with you. Okay, here are the four that we agree on are going to be the most significant if you win, that, or you get on the long list that we want authors, other readers to see, and the press needs to submit to, or the author, then we have that dance, we do that. But that also is again back to that long arc. We're submitting for that award possibly even 2 years after your book has been submitted. So we're, in our minds, it's okay, we're planning this stuff early to know what cycle to get you in, when we have to have materials, and then saying, okay, putting a note in our, however we track this, a year and a half from now, this is going to be our priority. But, so the other thing that I love is an author who also has those priorities and marks that year and a half in their calendar too, to say like, hey, Allison, just making sure this is still on your radar. And that way we're, again, we're staying on the same page, we're saying all the things. And then, what we can do is, again, like the awards winning is, it goes back to, we put that in your metadata. It will go on the top in bold on your book description, all of the, so it all just feeds back into the machine. It keeps everything fresh. It, keeps things to be moving. It gets you it's another reason for us to send out an additional email with the table of contents or what, whatever we want out there. Um, so so it can be very important, but it's just not what I think a misconception is that you've won this award. Now everyone's going to buy your book. And that just, unfortunately, we do not live in that world anymore. Yeah.
You know what it does help with though is your next book.
Yes.
Like having that award, like for your next book, helps a huge amount. And I wanted to say one other thing about blurbs too is I love a blurb from a reader's report because oftentimes those folks feel like there might be a conflict of interest if they later write a review. I don't want to go approach new people because I want them to write a review. I want them to write something publicly and not just for the back cover of the book in, 70 words. So yeah, that's kind of the last thing on blurbs for me.
Nice. So we need to wrap up because we're at 2 p.m. here. But I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and a really big thank you to Allison and Cameron for sharing all of this expertise and advice and ways that folks can better work with their press to market their books. I hope if you take away one thing from today, it's that book marketing is not about doing everything, but it really is about understanding where your efforts matter most for your particular project and your particular communities, and how to best collaborate with your press in that process. So you're all going to be receiving a recording of the session in the next week or so, so keep an eye on your inbox. And while this is our final session in our spring publishing series lineup, the publishing series will be back in the fall. So keep an eye on our social media for more information about that. So thank you all again, and I will see you all next time.
Thank you, Kathy. I love doing these, so this was great.
Yes. Very fun.